Russia's invasion of Ukraine initially sought to transform Europe/NATO's strategic balance in Russia's favor, and they did this while hiding their ambitions behind outright lies such as the genocide of Russians in eastern Ukraine or denazification, which really we haven't been able to determine what that actually means for Russia. In reality, the Russians wanted to install a pro-Russian regime in Kyiv. Russia also aimed to reaffirm its influence over ex-USSR states and solidify itself as a global power. However, these goals have been largely unmet. Instead, Russia's actions have led to NATO's expansion and increased Ukraine and Moldova's chances of joining NATO and the European Union. Russian forces, contradicting their own anti-genocide stance, have been implicated in severe human rights violations, including rape, torture, and mass killings. Russia's regional influence has not been strengthened either. It's declined, leading to greater reliance on China. And this shift has repositioned Russia from an equal partner with China to a more subordinate role. Consequently, Russia's original objectives in Ukraine remain unfulfilled. But this doesn't mean Russia has lost the war, not in the slightest. The situation for Ukraine remains dire. Unable to achieve his initial goals rapidly, Putin, whose leadership is now tied to the conflict's outcome, has redefined Russia's success metrics and the timeline for achieving them, leading to continued aggression against Ukraine that is designed to wear down Ukrainian resolve and Western support. The implications for the West are substantial and quite clear. A Russian victory is still obtainable, especially when people like Putin and Russia is propped up by Western Russia supporters and idiots who ignorantly screech at me in the comments, "Peace is the most important thing, you warmonger." Yeah, thank God you didn't have this platform when Hitler was gassing the Jews. A Russian victory would undermine the strength and global perception of Western nations, especially the United States, and potentially have security repercussions for NATO members, including in the Black Sea. It could destabilize democratic processes across Europe. It will also likely lead to a broad nuclear proliferation, since it seems like only those with nukes can get away with literal murder of a neighbor, and the largest democratic global military powers do nothing about it. The situation is exacerbated by Russia's perception of the West, and I mean the US, NATO, European Union, as not just an adversary, someone that they're competing with, but it is now their primary enemy. This view is now deeply embedded in Russia's military strategy and its justifications for the conflict in Ukraine, as well as echoed in its domestic propaganda. They aren't fighting Ukraine. No, they're fighting NATO in Ukraine, is what they say. For countries like France and Germany, their efforts to avoid hostility with Russia are ineffective so long as Russia views the totality of the West as an existential threat. Guess what, Germany and France? You're in this boat with us. So the West faces a critical decision: to confront or to acquiesce to Russian aggression. Western nations must recognize the urgency of European security at this juncture. It requires a substantial financial commitment, and any attempt to pressure Ukraine into a settlement, hoping for a return to normalcy, would really only delay and escalate the conflict's costs in the long run, given Russia's antagonistic stance against the West. Western leaders need to communicate the complex realities of what Russia is doing and what the outcomes will be to the citizens of their countries. And to do this effectively, they need to be more forceful and, for the love of God, say to a camera that Russia must lose completely and then explain why. If FDR could do it about Germany, so can Joe Biden. The 2024 presidential election in the US is pivotal. A US leader that is somewhat anti-NATO or sympathetic to what Russia is doing could destabilize Europe and weaken the US internally. The outcome would escalate the risk of a broader European conflict that could drag the US in. It's crucial for American leaders and voters that are concerned about national security or the safety of our allies and global stability to reject this idea of defeatism, which is actually being repackaged as "we don't want to escalate." It is reminiscent of the stance in the late 1930s that France held. We don't want to escalate this situation with Russia. We don't want to escalate this situation with Yemen Houthis. It is a level of pathetic that I didn't think America would reach, given how strong we came out against Russia. We used to hit bullies in the mouth. Now we wring our hands and worry about escalation. Besides, negotiations ending the war in Ukraine are very much unlikely. Russia is making unfathomably disgusting demands to stop the war. Nonetheless, Putin keeps saying he wants negotiations, as if he's just like, hey, we would totally stop if y'all would just listen to us. Those in the West hoping for a ceasefire that benefit anyone but Russia might not fully understand Russia's history of using negotiations to string along those that support Russia's enemies. Or they create conflicts elsewhere to distract us. And I'm looking at you, Hamas, but that's an entirely different video. I mean, I keep hearing from one particularly stupid candidate, who I won't mention by name, but it rhymes with Gamaswamy, say we should ignore Russia and focus on China. Western focus on Russia should not be seen as a distraction from the challenges posed by China. Even after Russia's invasion of Crimea in 2014, Western policy often regarded Russia as a secondary concern to China, but this view needs to be reassessed as the issues are now interconnected. Russia is China's litmus test for Taiwan, and they are testing our resolve. China and Russia say they are friends, and we need to believe them, despite the fact that it looks like China is merely using Russia for its resources. To do this, we need to correct a key issue in our rhetoric, and I mentioned this before. The West continues to skirt the issue of what victory in Ukraine actually means, and I'm not sure why it's so hard to just expressly say what we want. Since 2014, the US and Europe have not conclusively addressed how to resolve the Russian aggression in Ukraine. Whether it was Obama or Trump or Biden or other leaders in Washington, Paris, Berlin, and other capitals, none of them have ever explicitly said what outcome is desired, whether it's restoring the borders in Ukraine to pre-2022 or pre-2014, or completely removing Russia's military presence altogether. Make a goddamn decision and move out. And for God's sake, stop worrying about the umpteenth Russian red line that we will inevitably cross. Decisions on these matters are urgent, and they will significantly impact Ukraine's future, European stability, and the integrity of NATO. Biden recently warned that the United States is at risk of being pulled into a direct conflict with Russia if the Kremlin succeeds in its war against Ukraine. And though he should have followed up with, therefore, Russia must be ejected and the 2014 borders restored, he was right. Putin sees this as a 10-year plan and has said that they will not stop in Ukraine even if it takes 5 years. Like previous Russian leaders, he clearly doesn't care about deaths. His FSB mops up dissent in his country, and the latest polls from Levada show an 84% approval rating of Putin among Russians. So either they actually do like what Putin is doing, or they are afraid to even express their true feelings to a poll. And it's probably a little of both. Either way, it truly highlights Putin's power in that country. Russia will hide behind nuclear rhetoric as Putin tests our resolve when they move on Moldova, and when we have the same tepid response, probably moves on Estonia to really test NATO's resolve in that case. And he will do so with the support, whether willing or not, of his people. So stopping Putin and Russia and Ukraine now is the only way to short-circuit a potential World War III scenario from playing out, and guaranteeing China gets the message as well. But we have to do it this year.